let's take a look, if we will, one more time at those numbers. And I'll begin with you, Max Keiser. Across the board, analysts expressing a bit of surprise, but you were telling me before we came on that you're not surprised at these numbers.
Well, France and Germany did not participate in one of the worst policy blunders of the past 5 years, blowing by what Joseph Stiglitz estimates $3 trillion on that Iraq invasion, and for no particular reason. And I think part of the growth here in France and Germany reflect this fact that they didn't blow trillions of dollars on that faulty Iraq invasion policy, which has yet to be shown to have any real point to it. But you know, the other thing to keep in mind is that here in Europe, the economy is not as in debt overall as the U.S. economy. Forget just the Iraq debts, but there's another 50 to 60 trillion in unfunded pension liabilities that have yet to be accounted for. There's $13 trillion in debt ceiling that has been recently raised. So the U.S. and the U.K. are awash in debt. Continental Europe, not so much. And as a result, they're reaping the benefit of having a little bit more responsible economic leadership here in Europe, and the smart move not to get involved in the huge sinkhole that was Iraq and Afghanistan and all the other adventures that the U.S. military seems hell-bent on getting involved with for no particular reason other than, again, the sadistic leaders in Washington, D.C.
All right. Torsten Polleit, in Germany, the debt has tripled, the state debt, both here in France and in the U.S., but it's not the same proportions. Is that the explanation in your view?
I think it's very important to point the finger to the debt situation on a worldwide scale. Basically, I think it's important to come up with the right diagnosis of the causes of the economic and monetary debacle which we have seen in the last 2 years. And I would say there is a clear root cause of all this, and this is the basically unfettered paper money systems we have established, not only in the United States of America, but also here in the Eurozone, in the UK. Worldwide, we have central banks which produce ever greater amounts of money through credit, and that sooner or later has caused the economic disequilibria which are about to correct and plunge the economies into recession.
So what you're saying is it's not just public debt, it's also private debt.
Absolutely. It's not just public debt. Private debt also plays a role here. Just to give you a number, an interesting number, the total balance sheet volume of all bank assets in the euro area relative to GDP is around about 340%. That's huge. It's much smaller in the United States of America. By the way, it's around about 90%. So we have a debt problem too, and that debt problem has to be solved in order to make the economies return to a sustainable growth path.
I'm very much surprised that all these figures are never given, nowhere. We are always saying unemployment is going up, but we are not given but it's always, this is surprising me. I'm not surprised by a kind of, yes.
Max Keiser?
Yeah, in the U.S., when they say the unemployment rate is 9.5%, they don't include, for example, people who have stopped looking for work. If you add those numbers back into the amount, you're talking about upwards of 15 to 16% is the actual rate of unemployment. It doesn't take into consideration that wages are going down. It doesn't take into consideration that the loss of the jobs are the high-paying manufacturing jobs. The employment picture in the U.S. is absolutely horrible. It's getting a lot worse. And the financial sector, of course, is rebounding and benefiting by this huge bailout money, and that contributes to a so-called GDP number. But remember that GDP number has as one of its component the inflation deflator, and inflation is totally misstated as well. Those aren't the actual inflation numbers when they're reporting GDP. So this is a cocktail of misinformation. And I agree that if you can't have a rebound or an economy or a strong economy and have unemployment going up, that doesn't work. I mean, in the old days when they slashed jobs, Wall Street would have this humongous rally. for a period of time, but now it's cutting into the bone of the economy, and the economy is collapsing under the weight of all this malfeasance, all this government crony capitalism, and the fact that you've got a tremendous problem with an entrenched oligarchy in the U.S. that's destroying the economy, and it's a huge problem.
How much has the stimulus plan played into today's numbers?
Well, I think the effect is much lower than you might expect. The 50 billion earmarked for additional spending does include various items which are not really pushing up aggregate demand. It's in a way, I think it's a good thing because, as you know, in Germany we made a very bad experience with running up huge debt-financed government spending programs. Look at the start of the 1990s when we had the German reunification. Public debt basically exploded without affecting economic growth and pushing down unemployment. And I'm really wondering, look at Japan. They ran huge deficits starting in the early 1990s, and they didn't create jobs, and they didn't create additional economic growth. I think it's an illusion to expect that the government, by intervening into markets, can actually, out of thin air, create economic welfare. I think it's very important, and that would be my advice to authorities worldwide. People have to reconsider that the free market system is actually the source of production of jobs and economic well-being. And I'm a bit concerned what I see on a worldwide scale, namely that people are calling upon governments to step in the hope that they improve the situation. And I think this is a very dangerous situation. And we just heard before that, for instance, Franklin Delano Roosevelt came up after 1929 with huge public spending programs, and he basically kept the United States of America in a depressionary environment because of his policy. So we shouldn't repeat these mistakes. But at the moment, we may call it Keynesian policies, but the government is increasingly pushing aside the very forces that can create economic growth and economic welfare.
Max Keiser, the nanny state is not part of the solution, says Torsten Polleit.
Yeah, keep government out of the day-to-day workings of business, and that would include the banking sector. U.S. banks and U.K. banks are the biggest social welfare bums in the world. These banks on Wall Street made horrible bets, and the government came in and bailed them out of their horrible bets as this huge transfer of wealth from the private sector to these, they transferred it to the public from these banks.
But what was the alternative?
The alternative was understand that the end of the Bush administration, the beginning of the Obama administration, they could have just as easily wiped clean every mortgage debt in America and every credit card debt in America, and you would have had a robust consumer economy right now, and you would have had to have these banks deal with the fact that they broke the law, they've been manipulating markets, they've been dealing on inside information, and they should be held accountable for that. And that's what could have been done, because ultimately the $13 trillion or $25 trillion or $30 trillion price tag this bank bailout's going to be is something that could have been used to completely wipe clean every balance sheet in America and the UK back when the crisis started. But Barack Obama does not have the political cojones to do the right thing. He's in the pocket of Wall Street, I'm sorry to say. He's been a failure on this score, a huge disappointment.